What's up, everybody? Welcome into another edition of SSPN Offseason, Ethan. And this is going to be kind of a conversation-like episode, Ethan.
Mm.
Obviously, as we've mentioned in like the past three podcast clips, whatever we've released, it's the dog days of NBA summer. You can go to another NBA channel and you'll see the same thing. I forget which Locked On podcast I saw recently, but it was funny because it was like after we opened up that podcast a couple weeks ago,
Uh-huh.
talking about how like, man, these are we're in the trenches, I think is what I said when it came to news. It was like the other day on my Twitter feed, I saw another Locked On NBA podcast that was like opening it up with like, we're in the dog days of summer or something like that. So it's not just us, Ethan. Everybody's feeling it. But me and you, we've kind of talked about some ideas behind the scenes, maybe some stuff to talk about to kind of hold us over in the interim. And the
Mhm.
thing that has kind of popped up for us this offseason the most, or just something that stood out in our minds, something we wanted to talk about, in a podcast setting like this, is Brian Wright and his mentality. Obviously, you guys see the name of the video, you see the thumbnail, it's Brian Wright's blueprint. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. We're going to give our opinion kind of on what we've seen, when you take in the full context of kind of everything since the DeJounte trade, or maybe even the Derek trade was before the DeJounte trade, right? Yeah, that was at
Correct.
the
Yep.
deadline, and then it was in the offseason. So really that Derek White trade 2 seasons ago at the deadline, taking all of that, context into account, Ethan, we kind of saw the clearer picture, obviously, with the Spurs record this season, going for Victor Wembanyama and, getting blessed once again, winning the lottery. All of those decisions kind of led up to that. And not to go too long here, because I definitely, obviously, I want to hear what you have to say, Ethan.
Mm.
But the other thing about this is that, well, I'm just going to let you talk, Ethan, because when I did that, I ended up losing where I was at there. So just tell me your thoughts on kind of the whole, just this whole saga that the Spurs have been through
Yeah.
under Brian Wright, and kind of what it's told you about him as a GM.
Yeah, well, to start from the beginning, he was kind of dealt not a bad hand, but like a subpar hand when he kind of took over as the Spurs decision maker. When we had DeMar and Lamar, an aging LaMarcus Aldridge, and kind of an old team in general, Patty Mills, Rudy Gay, and it's like, okay, where do we go from here? And at times, it felt like he wasn't making the best decisions, especially in the moment. But hindsight is 2020. Looking back on it all, he was like a chess master, carefully moving pieces, seemingly not box office decisions. The Derek White trade, the DeJounte Murray trade, trading Josh Richardson for like 5 second-round picks, buying out LaMarcus, trading DeMar for a future couple first-round picks that might end up being pretty valuable depending on how Chicago's season pans out next year. Obviously, managing to get a protected pick from Charlotte, Atlanta's future first that also look like they might be valuable depending on how things work out with Trae Young. And DeJounte obviously just got an extension. But all these little moves that now that we're sitting here with Victor Wembanyama on our roster, with guys like Keldon Johnson, we had three first round picks last year, Jeremy Sohan, Malachi Branham, and Blake Wesley. It's like, okay, this rebuild did not take nearly as long as some of us may have been expecting. And I know we're still technically in a rebuild. I'm not saying we're going to win a championship next year or even the year after, but suddenly it's clear that there was a plan in place and the pieces have finally fallen into place. And it's like, okay, we're getting ready to start checking people, Jude, like the chess game thing. We're in a good spot. We have a pawn one space away from becoming a queen. We got his king in the corner. It's like, okay, the Spurs suddenly, according to Bleacher Report, have the number one young core in the NBA. So it's like, clearly he's been making the right moves, despite on occasion you and I disagreeing with what they were at the time.
Yeah. Man, there's a lot of stuff that you touched on there, but
Yeah.
it's so important. So like, I mean, you just touched on kind of maybe we've disagreed with some of it in the past. The thing that sticks out in my brain is the DeJounte trade. I held
Yeah.
on. I've still got his jersey up. It's kind of covered by the two fantasy football trophies there, but I still haven't really let it go a little
Yeah.
bit. I mean, no, I definitely have at this point. I just had to make the joke about the jersey still being up, especially with how everything turned out.
Mhm.
But in the moment, I was like, why are we doing this? This seems like a potential franchise point guard, a defensive stopper. He's been, he learned under Kawhi. It's like it steals easy. And then of course, while there hasn't been anything that's been like, DeJounte hasn't done anything to get himself in trouble. I just will say that since that situation happened, I would say that he's shown sides of his personality that kind of revealed to me why the Spurs ended up doing what they did. And I'm sure also on the court was a thing as well with the way that the Spurs are moving with their play style. I don't think that DeJounte necessarily fit that, on top of just being, about 4 or 5 years older than kind of the rest of the roster as well, just in a different place, kind of becoming an all-star, et cetera, right? But he just became an all-star, and we trade him immediately after, so that's why I was kind of like, you just don't know how all these other guys are going to turn out, but he knows his guys he's picked, Ethan. And, I think we may have talked about guys that he's picked in the past. And I think we were mistaken, actually, because for some reason in my mind, Ethan, and this could have been, eons ago. I don't know when this podcast was. It was at some point, I think, during this season. But we were talking about his draft picks. And I believe we were referencing his first draft as the Lucas Samanic, Quindary Weatherspoon draft. And those were kind of the two that we talked about that maybe what weren't the best picks. But I just went on his NBA.com profile. He became the general managers for the Spurs in July of 2019, which means he didn't pick that draft. So we might have just been thinking summer 2019, you know what I'm saying? And thinking that he made those picks when he actually didn't. His first picks were Devin Vassell and Trey Jones. So when you start to look at the Spurs draft picks, we don't know how Primo would have ended up turning out, but that was completely out of his control. That wasn't anything basketball wise. And then who was this? I'm forgetting the second round pick in the Primo draft. I was trying to pull it up.
It was the sharpshooter that's no longer with us from Iowa.
Oh, Joe Wieskamp.
Joe Wieskamp, right. Yeah.
Okay, so you could say that's a little bit of a scratch draft, but we didn't cut Wieskamp. We cut Wieskamp basically because we picked up Romeo in the trade with the Celtics. So it's like, you see what I'm saying? The person that we're playing over him is an asset that Brian Wright is an asset because of Brian Wright, essentially. Obviously, the Spurs front office and RC Buford and Pop are still involved as well. So I don't want to, we definitely got to give them still some credit. But still, these are moves that are like, the final okay was Brian Wright. You know what I'm saying? So It's like, okay, you can say Primo, that's an asterisk. Wieskamp, you ended up cutting him, but it's for somebody else that you picked up that you felt like was better for this season. And then at the end of the day, also, when you look at the team this year, you signed Julian Champagnie, who we would probably both agree has a higher ceiling than Wieskamp ever did. God bless Wieskamp. Sure. Hope he stays in the league. But you know what I'm saying? There's so many, for every deficiency that you find, other than wins and losses, but that was just the nature of last season. That was kind of the goal at the end of the day anyway. It feels like you can find, something that substituted it. Like I said, if you want to say, if you want to talk about Wieskamp getting cut, you can mention Champagnie or Romeo. If you want to talk about losing Josh Primo, let's talk about the 3 first-round draft picks we had last season, Ethan, where we picked 2 guards. You know what I'm saying? To kind of make up for that because of the other moves that Brian Wright has made. Now, granted, I think we would have had those picks regardless of the Primo situation, but still, because you were in that situation where you can have 2 first-round picks, and we'll have to see how Blake Wesley pans out. That's probably the biggest question mark right now. But after last season, you look at Jeremy Sohan and Malachi Branham, and it's just like, like I said, the 2021 draft is kind of just an unfortunate thing in itself. But the other 2, Trey Jones, Devin Vassell, guys part of the roster moving forward, right? And then you've got Jeremy Sohan and Malachi Branham, other 2 established dudes. You know what I'm saying? So we know the draft record has been really solid. And if someone wants to hone in on 2021, I'm just giving him a little bit of a pass there. And I think that that's okay and reasonable. But then on top of that, you've got all the assets that we've picked up, Ethan. It's, these are our newest Spurs, Ethan, are the prime example. Shetty Osman, Reggie Bullock, obviously Lamar Stevens left. But campaign is another one. I mean, those are all trades where we just had the assets in the cap room because of the situation that Brian Wright put us in, essentially, with the help of everybody else who works around him. We were in the position to where we were, the prime suspect to help facilitate these trades and take on some pretty solid role players for a young team that, like we said, at the worst, these dudes are going to benefit our guys in training camp. Whoever gets cut, which most likely I think two of those three, Ethan, that we have to cut is going to be Devontae Graham and Kem Birch. So really, two out of those three in Shetty Osman, Reggie Bullock, and Campaign are going to be on the roster. Minus say like Campaign doesn't want to play for the team, which we've talked about before. But even in that situation, then you get Shetty and Reggie. Like these are just moves that are going to benefit the team regardless. Like, okay, Reggie beats somebody out. That means he beat somebody out. And then you've got a shooter, a veteran shooter who's played on a lot of different teams with multiple different stars to play alongside, Wembenyama in his first year and help the team. I mean, there's just, I know I'm going off a little bit here, Ethan.
No, you're
kind of
fine.
talking for a while, but like, there's so much stuff that he does well. I'm even losing my train of thought again here, getting caught up in all this stuff I'm saying.
You're all right. I mean, the blueprint, like you're saying, it was 100% clear. It was bring on valuable assets, role players, and then build up their trade stock, trade them for second round or first round picks or pick swaps. So we've accumulated all these assets and these draft assets.
We didn't even talk about Jay Rich.
We didn't talk about Jay Rich, Jakob Pertl, all these guys that we've moved on, and we still managed to fill the roster with solid players, like you were saying. Champagnie, Devontae Graham filled a role for us last year in the absence of
Charles
Jay Rich. Charles Bassey was another guy that we signed from the trash heap. He was able to find guys off of Philadelphia's team that they just threw away, and they became very valuable role players for the Spurs. And now we end up with Campaign, Bullock, and Shetty Osman, who, I mean, there's really no losing scenario for the Spurs. With those three players. Like, one of them might be cut, sure, but you can hang on to them and they can play valuable minutes for the Spurs next season and really help develop our young guys. Or you can trade them at the deadline and continue to accumulate first and second round picks for the future.
There's no losing situation with these guys.
And we still have cap space. We're still probably top 10, if not top 5 in the NBA as far as cap space available going into next offseason.
I think actually Paul Garcia tweeted here. Keep talking, Ethan. I'm gonna pull up a tweet about that actually.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the question would be going into next offseason. Do we try and make a big splash play to get another free agent signing? I doubt it. I think we'll just continue to move meticulously and thoughtfully, as Brian Wright has done since he, came on board. And what I love about what Brian Wright's been able to do, and the entire Spurs front office, Jude, is it reminds me of like when you first started watching Marvel movies. I don't know if you're into the MCU, but you're like, oh, these are just fun movies. And then you see Endgame and you go back and watch them all and you're like, oh my God, this was all planned. Like, you had no idea these little details were going to be
I was
so
the guy who watched them all, I went and watched like all of them in order again before Endgame came out. But I totally get what you're saying. Like, you didn't realize it when you're growing up watching the movies, or us, just watching these moves that the Spurs are making. We weren't realizing the whole time they're setting up for Victor Wembanyama.
Literally.
And, it makes sense because of the timeline, but I don't know. We're not GMs, Ethan. We're so caught up in the now, being fans, doing this show on YouTube that, that even though it was kind of in front of our face, we still didn't even see it. But I think a lot of Spurs fans didn't realize that until really this season, which of course was after the Derek and DeJounte trades at the deadline and in the offseason. And once we did that, then it was like, okay, things are kind of clear. But it wasn't clear until it was like, okay, this is like the tank year. You know what I'm saying? Which is also typical for Spurs fashion. But that tweet that I was talking about, Ethan, I'm about to get it up for us here in a second. So shout out to Paul Garcia. He works with what is it again? Project Spurs. That's the name of it. Yeah. OG. But as you can see right there, Ethan, so though we don't know the official terms of Mamu and Sissoko's deals, the Spurs are projected to be $1 million over the salary cap now that all players have officially signed their deals. San Antonio is $28.2 million under the tax. But that's really the key. Honestly, I'm glad we brought up this point, Ethan, because while, or I brought up this tweet because while I forget exactly the point is we do still have cap space because the
We still
tax is
have
all
to
that
waive
matters.
guys.
Yeah. And tax is all that matters
Hmm.
under the new CBA. So even though we are over the cap, like I was right in that, it's also like your point is still correct because everybody still keeps dipping into the tax anyway. Like we
Hmm.
still have 28 million left in the tax, which a lot of teams don't have.
And we're going to cut 3 guys before the season starts. And we have expiring deals going into
Yep.
next offseason. And we'll probably trade a couple contracts at the deadline. And the trade market has been, to me, the most valuable part of Brian Wright taking over for the Spurs because we were never active in the trade market. And to be frank, we were bad at trades. Like, I think back to Rudy Gay, Patty Mills, LaMarcus Aldridge, Marco Bellinelli, like a bunch of veterans that
He
we
had
should
to
have
go
traded.
out of the Spurs norm. Sorry to
Yes.
interrupt you.
No, you're fine. We should have traded those 4 guys way prior to when they actually left the Spurs. And I think that situation, we bought all those. We bought LaMarcus out, and I think we just let Patty and Rudy and Marco walk after
Yep.
their
Yep.
contracts ended. So we didn't get anything from those 4 players.
Yep.
We traded DeMar. That was a great decision. And then from that point forward, it was like, okay, we're going to trade everyone at their peak, like abilities, so that their value is like through the roof. So we got probably way too much for DeJounte, to be completely frank. We probably got a little, Derek White's trade probably ended up being right where it should have been because
But
of
okay, but think
his
of the
value moving
assets we
forward.
got off of that. That's the
You're
thing
not
because
wrong.
we got Jay Rich in that trade, so that's
Yep.
4 second-round picks right there.
True. I didn't think about that because we flipped Jay Rich, who was worthless in the NBA when we got him. To be frank, I mean, no offense to Jay Rich, I love him.
We revived him.
We revived. He was a throw-in to make money work. Like he wasn't even
He
playing for the
was
Boston
supposed to be
Celtics.
what he was for us. The crazy thing is what he was for us is what he was supposed to be in Boston.
Yeah, and I mean, poor Jay Rich. I mean, in
Right.
Miami was his peak, and then he went to Philly where he was like pretty good, and then it just kind of gradually dipped when he went to Dallas and then Boston. Like he had shooting woes. Comes to the Spurs, reignites his career. We get 4 seconds from him and Devontae Graham,
Bro.
who wasn't playing for the Pelicans, who now plays for the Spurs, who probably boosted his trade value because he had like
Oh.
a 30 piece and was just chucking shots. Now I'm sure there are fans like in LA or New York that are like, Devontae Graham's the guy we should be going for, a shooter, a backup point guard. So suddenly we're probably going to get a couple seconds for him. Like we're just rekindling these guys. Chetty Osman's probably going to win 6 Man of the Year now because he's on the Spurs. He's going to have like an incredible season.
Dude, while you're talking, I'm just realizing Jay Rich literally just took like hey man, like we traded him, bro. Play 2 semesters here with Pop.
Yeah.
Get your get your stuff back together. Like here's NBA like boot camp. Like you know what I mean? Like,
pretty much.
Come to Pop boot camp for half of 2 seasons. Look, you'll be a free agent. You can go back to Miami coming off a finals run in a role where they need you. And really, if we want to talk about like the 2 systems in the NBA, like the Heat are very similar to the Spurs, not in necessarily play style, but in the sense that they can have dudes like Max Strus and Duncan Robinson like be playing big in playoff games. Like we had Jay Sims doing the same thing because of the culture, the Heat culture, that Pat Riley, Eric Spoelstra culture that just disseminates throughout the building, especially when you got a guy like Jimmy at the head of it. But enough about the Heat. The point is, I think Jay Rich is going to do well in Miami. I think he'll do similar to how he did in San Antonio. But we already mentioned how we were happy about Jay Rich before, but I'm so glad you touched on this, Ethan, and you touched on Devontae Graham as well, because earlier when I was talking about this and just talking about the aspects of him, it's not just that, he's drafted well or that he's put us in the position to where we're able to, be a part of these 3-team trades to facilitate and gain assets from around the league because of the position we're in. But it's also what he's done on the trade market, like you said. I mean, and that's how I kind of, when I interrupted you there and I mentioned like the Spurs were not like that. We did not do midseason trades, like especially like of our key players. And I know that was a good decision considering the position that the Spurs were in and what they had coming up on the roster with guys like Keldon, Devin, and Trey. But at the same time, like I said, in the moment, it's like Derek White and DeJounte Murray were kind of your stabilizers. They were the two guys who knew how to run the offense.
Yeah.
Pop had built both of them up. And I didn't. It almost felt like when we traded Derek that okay, that was the decision. Like as much as like as over time the DeJounte thing has made more sense. In the moment that season, it was like okay, at the deadline there was a little bit more smoke, but it was like, are we going to trade Derek or DeJounte? Because it feels like now that we've played half a season with both of them, unfortunately, our fears have been unearthed. They probably don't fit that well next to each other. And so even in that moment, it was like, okay, they just picked DeJounte, right?
Yeah.
And then that wasn't the case either. So that's the other thing that's kind of been the theme throughout all of this. And this kind of ties back into when I talked about how, the Spurs weren't tanking until it was like, this is the season we want to tank, like we didn't, it wasn't literally until the July before that season that they were in full tank mode. He's been stealthy with his decisions as well. And obviously I'm sure other NBA front office types could smell it a little bit, especially with the Spurs track record. But for us as fans and everybody observing in our audience, it was very stealthy, which is another thing that you like to see.
If you're a fan of Gilbert Arenas and his podcast, you might even say it was set up by the NBA.
Right.
Because he was like, so the Spurs
I said
got
it
Wemby.
was rigged on our live show, so I got nothing to say.
He absolutely believes it's rigged. He was like, they did it and no one said a word. And he was like, every other team that tanked, they were like talking about it. It was national media coverage. It was like the Spurs, they were obviously tanking, and nobody said a damn word.
No, but he is right about that though, because still it felt like remember even like this was like a week before the draft. It was like, who is the best fit for Wemby? And it was like Portland, know, like and I get it. Obviously they have Dame, but still it was like every team other than the Spurs. Now that was a little bit of a unique example there, but still in other conversations on ESPN, I'm sure so many of you watched, and as per usual, until he got drafted by us, we're not going to be on there.
Yeah, suddenly everyone was like, oh yeah, I forgot they exist.
That's right. We can turn on SportsCenter and maybe see a little bit. I'm glad that the hiatus that Victor has taken though, Ethan, that has also been the same. There's been a little bit of stuff here and there that ESPN's done, but he hasn't been doing any appearances or, they haven't been getting footage or anything. I'm sure when the season starts, we'll be right back there and I will be happy about that.
Yes.
But him not being in the media in that aspect reinforces what he said at Summer League.
Yeah, and you know what he's doing. He's in the lab, Jude.
Yes.
He's working out.
He is.
He's getting strong.
He is, Ethan. He is.
I'm excited, Jude. And Keldon's cooking on TikTok.
Oh,
sorry.
No, please. Tell me.
They were cutting up avocados and making some salsa and stuff, bro. He was
Needs to make some beignets, bro.
I think it was an HEB like TikTok.
Okay, my bad. That's all hate on me, actually.
It's all right, buddy.
No, because if it's a HEB TikTok, it's worth it. I was just, in light of Victor, it's just like everything feels French or feels like it has to be French. But
I thought you were saying like feels like foul, like a bad word.
No. I was just saying that's why you were saying whatever they were cooking up, and then when you explained it, I'm like, oh, that's a HEB thing. Never mind, because I support all the Spurs HEB content. It's like the best Spurs content.
Absolutely, it is. But I was gonna say I forgot to say like an actual good point here because we were talking about Wembanyama was in the gym and just in a cocoon without cameras or without any social media coverage at all. He hasn't been active at all. Devin Vassell has, and he's just casually been posting some photos of himself working out with who? Kevin Durant.
That's right.
Looking really buff. Like we thought he was ripped last offseason. He looks yoked, my guy. And he looks focused. Like he's not smiling in any of his pictures. He's like determined, focused on the task at hand. So I'm pumped for Devin because he really had a season derailed last year, if we want to be completely honest, by injuries and that surgery. We didn't get to see full strength Devin Vassell for longer than like a 3-game stretch. So as much as we are excited to see Wembanyama and Sohan and how are they going to work well together, will KJ start, blah, 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 Devin Vassell is starting. That's a fact. And so I think he might have the best statistical outbreak next season next to the rest of the guys.
100% agree. On top of the fact that he didn't even get to play a full season this year, and he was by far the most consistent, as we've talked about many a times, off the dribble scorer on the
Yes.
team. But Ethan, there is some news that I saw before the podcast that I
I think I
forgot
know.
about that I've got to put on the screen here in a second, and you probably know what it is,
I think so.
since you just said that. But we're gonna go ahead and throw this puppy up here
Yes,
right
it
now.
is.
So there we go. This is like so important. Like, how did we forget to, you know what I'm saying?
True.
So KSAT 12 breaking earlier today at 4 o'clock. So about 3 hours from when we're recording this. A source at KSAT or a source tells KSAT that the San Antonio Spurs are finalizing a deal with Frost Bank for the naming rights of their arena. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I was wondering. I was very confused. I was wondering if there was going to be, if AT&T was going to maybe try to get back in the mix just because of the Wembenyama result in the lottery. L L lol. Sorry, at AT&T. Haha, you thought it wasn't going to be a good investment, but now it's the best investment in the league. Lol. Anyways, I had to say that. As of right now,
Yeah.
we'll see. Knock
They're
on
trying
wood,
right now.
everything. Yeah. But Frost, it makes sense. They're on the. Well, I know they're not on the jersey anymore, but Frost and the Spurs have had. I mean, I feel like going to games growing up, there was always some sort of Frost promotion. They're a Texas bank. I mean,
Hmm.
I
That's my
think,
favorite building in San Antonio is the Frost Tower.
and they're iconic in Austin too. Is it like an owl in San Antonio?
It's not an owl.
Okay, it's
The
an
building?
owl in Austin. It's an owl, dude. It looks like
It's
an
like
owl.
it
Anyways,
like turns. It's like I don't know how to describe it. It's like multiple points and it kind of turns upward. It has lights on the edges. And for Fiesta, they turn it Fiesta colors. And for Spurs games, they light it up with Fiesta
ooh,
colors. It's a cool building, and I love that little logo. I forgot that it wasn't on our jerseys anymore. I'm hoping it'll be on the floor because I actually think it's
I'm
a like
sure.
it's simple, but it's like it works with the Spurs. It's white, it meshes well with our colors.
Yes, for sure. Um,
The Frost Forum, the
The
Frost
Frost
Center.
Forum. Yes, the Frost. Anyway, I'm just when I saw that, I was like, okay, that makes sense because they were our jersey sponsor before. Obviously, they weren't anymore. But with Wembenyama, I'm sure it was just a bidding war.
The House of Frost.
Ooh, that is. I feel like it's just going to be the Frost Center. That's what I feel like it's going to be
You're probably right.
because we're not until we build a new arena. I don't think that we'll change the second part
Hot
of the
take.
name.
I don't think I'll see another arena until I'm like 40.
Oh yeah, with all that talk. Oh my gosh, dude. I don't know. I totally could see in like 10 years if there's a lot of success
Mm,
and Wembenyamas I could see in like 10 years, but like that's the fastest. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like that's still like I don't think that's gonna be around for his whole career. I mean I would love a beautiful downtown stadium, but it's like we're getting a little bit of ahead of ourselves here. You know,
yeah,
you gotta as much as he's gonna bring in a bunch of revenue and like all the potential for the revenue is there. One, you never know what could happen with his career,
true.
so you gotta keep your fingers crossed with that. But then the other thing is still that money's just not there yet. Like it's gotta come in for that to be a legitimate thing to like start that process. So
Yeah,
we've got to have like a significant increase in revenue for like 3 to 4 years to start having that discussion. But you know, when I talk about that, I'm boring. You're using logistics and realistic talk.
I mean,
So
if we want realistic talk, you know why it was built where it was built? Because it's trashy and it was cheap land. Like, let's be honest. I love San Antonio. That is like the worst part of San Antonio to be in. Like, I had a buddy that was there. He's not from the area. He said he was walking to that Whataburger that's like across the street from that HEB that's right there. I don't know if you know the area well enough, but
I do. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to remember where the Whataburger is, but
it's
I
it's
know
really
the
right
area.
across from
I
HEB.
still get where you're coming from.
He
Trust
was
me.
walking at 2 in the morning back to his hotel,
Oh,
and I was like, "You
ooh.
were there?" I was like, "You were, bro." Like, I'm surprised you didn't see the crackheads because they hang out by that HEB.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know about
It's a
yeah,
rough part of town.
yeah,
So
2 a.m. is a little dicey to be out in the AT&T Center stomping grounds. But
yeah,
no, that really is the truth about the
it
stadium.
is.
Um, but anyways,
Selfishly, I would like it to be the north side, kind of where the practice arena is right now, because I live relatively close to that area. I'm not going to say exactly where.
No, but that would be nice. It would be
It would
closer
be.
for you.
Yes, it would.
We'll see. We'll see with all that type of stuff, Ethan. But to wrap up on Brian Wright's blueprint moving
Mm-hmm.
forward, Ethan, just to put a bow on this episode here today.
Mm-hmm.
He has been willing, like he's still not a blockbuster guy. That's the
Yeah.
point that I'm trying to get at. While
Yes.
he's done more with the Spurs when it comes to these trades that I think was important, and there's been a lot of comments that he's made that have led me to believe that it feels like he kind of had to push the organization to make some of these moves, like to let go of a Derek White or a DeJounte Murray and just go full rebuild after
Mm-hmm.
the DeRozan era, as well as the DeRozan trade. Was that his first move, actually?
It would have been his first
Because that was
trade.
2019, right?
Mm-hmm. It was the
DeRozan,
offseason after we drafted.
DeRozan Spurs trade. I'm just going to double check this here
No, he
before I
played one.
continue.
DeRozan played with Keldon 1 year. So he did not draft Keldon, but he came in the July after we drafted
Wow.
Keldon.
We traded. It was more than I thought. We traded DeRozan in 2021.
Yeah,
Actually,
that's
I
right. He
don't know
played
why.
2 years.
It just feels so. That time feels so far away. That was
Yeah.
such an interesting.
We were in purgatory.
I know. It was just such a. It was like I loved DeMar because it was just
Mm-hmm.
like he was kind of in the same situation as us. Like he didn't want to be traded. We didn't want to trade Kawhi, but it just was what it. You know what I mean? We were both in San Antonio with the results of the circumstances,
Yep.
and he was good to the. The community. He bought a lot of local merch and promoted it and stuff too. So he was
Good guy.
DeMar was great, but I know that Brian. I was getting back to something with
You were
Brian
saying
Wright's timeline.
it's not going to be big moves. It's going to be regularly scheduled programming. We're keeping Keldon. We're keeping Devin.
That's basically what
We're not making a trade
I didn't
with
say
young
that.
guys.
That's essentially what I was getting to. Other than the DeRozan move, which basically think about it: DeMar DeRozan, Derek White, DeJounte Murray. Those are all I was going to say they're all guys who can help playoff teams. That's probably the best way that I could put it. But then I was saying, well, technically, Chicago's not a playoff team and neither is Atlanta. But I think y'all get the point that I'm trying to say here. Those are guys who would be starters, contributors on teams.
They are.
And we decided in that time period to let go of all of them. And it seems like I said, there's been comments that Brian Wright's made. I can't think of every example off the top of my head right now, but one that I can think of is during the after we got the number 1 pick on ESPN. He's like, they would have probably thrown me in the river if this didn't work out. He said something like that, and it's because I'm pretty sure. I mean, all of those moves were made by him, and those type of moves weren't being made before he got here. That's kind of what we talked about in basically a segment a little while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And without him, doing that, essentially we wouldn't be in this situation, and we wouldn't have all of the guys that we do. And the other thing, like you said, that I wanted to get into as well was the fact that while he did make those moves and he was willing to do those, everything after that, he didn't, there were no blockbuster moves after that.
Mm-hmm.
It was it was all calculated. It was all specific. It wasn't just he was like, okay, let's just go trade all of our most players to get the best assets that we can get back. Although that was kind of what he did. It wasn't like he was just like, let's just go do it all right now. Let's just go try to get those assets back as fast as possible. It was like, no, okay, we're going to get rid of DeRozan here. We're going to evaluate DeJounte and Derek more. We're going to let them develop a little bit more, see how they work with the roster. Okay, we can see that Keldon's kind of emerging. He might have a little bit of a higher ceiling than both of these guys. Devin's starting to show a little bit of flashes. And the other thing about Brian Wright is that he's getting all of the intel from practice and training camp, not just from being there, but also the counsel I'm sure that he has with Greg Popovich and the coaching staff as well. So if they're telling him things about the young guys that is exceeding some of the other dudes on the roster, that could kind of push him and give him the confidence to make the decisions that he did. But
Yes.
he had to have the cojones to do that. You
Mhm.
see what I'm saying? Because you could have said, hey, we don't know how these other guys are going to turn out. Let's stick with these guys who are sure things and know the Spurs way. But then you're sitting at 45 and 37 in 2023. You see what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
if he doesn't go out on a limb to make those moves, if he doesn't make the decision, Ethan, I've talked and sat here and said all this stuff. This is really what sums it up in one sentence. If he doesn't make the decision to end the playoff run, the
Mhm.
20-year playoff run with the moves that he makes, we're not sitting here with Victor Wembanyama. And that, regardless of what anyone says, like, and regardless of who he had around him, that takes a lot of balls, like I said, to
Mhm.
like that is a harder thing than probably we realize. Especially when you're having to imagine you're having to tell RC and Pop, like, hey, I know you guys believe in yourselves and believe in the formula and what you can do with this roster, like always, but like we need to cut it off for a couple years if we're going to have a chance. I mean, imagine telling Pop and RC, like, right now, y'all don't have it. We need to get the roster better because even if you think we have the talent to compete here, we don't. Because
Mhm.
that's what we were trying to do with those guys. I mean, like, we were trying to play Keldon at the 4. We were trying to make it all fit. And, Pop was even, his mentality was completely different on the sidelines at that point. And it really took until this season to, or last season, I'm sure, in the middle of it to finally,
Mhm.
reap the benefits of that process.
1000%. In my last statement, I agree with everything that you just said. He's done a wonderful job, and it took a lot of guts to make those decisions. But the difference between his past trades with DeJounte, Derek, Jakob, Jay Rich, and trades that he might be making moving forward, he has remained adamant and committed that he is keeping this young core intact for the
Yeah.
foreseeable future. I mean, we were the only, like, fans are the only ones in the past saying, "Oh, we're not going to trade DJ and Derek." Like, he wasn't saying anything. Like, we were just like, "No, there's no way," because we don't do that. We would
Yeah.
never do that, and he did it, and he never said otherwise. So far, he's been a man of his word. So I'm willing to buy that he is not wanting to make any blockbuster moves going forward.
Yeah, at least this season. He said
Yeah.
it in multiple interviews. He said it verbatim. We
Hmm.
are what will determine like our trajectory this season is the guys who are on the court. He said that in an interview after the draft. I
Hmm.
mean, and even beforehand, he said in multiple interviews, before people could even finish their questions, go look at Tom Osborne, go look at Mike Finger, go look at Matthew Tynan, and go look at Jeff McDonald as well. Those are all like that's the 3 dudes from the San Antonio News Express, and then also Matthew Tynan, who's been covering for a while and does corporate knowledge on Substack. They all say in all of their interviews before the draft, before they could finish their question on about, would you consider trading Devin or Keldon to trade up in the draft? He said no before they could finish the question at all. And it's because, and I'm not saying that's going to be the case, forever, but for this season, we are not moving those guys. We are seeing how they fit around Victor Wembanyama. And considering that both of them are like, I mean, Devin Vassell is a sniper already. I mean,
Hmm.
and on top of his ability that's increasing to shoot off the dribble and as a creator, but like he fits in perfectly as a 3-and-D guy. If before you even talk about the other emerging skill sets that we're seeing, just placing him around Victor. And I think if Keldon gets more open shots, which he will get next to Victor, that should help his shooting percentage as well, which we saw the potential at the beginning of the year last year of how hot he can get shooting the ball.
Hmm.
So it's just like, to me, it's like these dudes fit perfectly around your big. Like, what are you talking about? They're
Hmm.
23 and 22. There's a reason that we gave Keldon an $80 million contract
Hmm.
for 4 years. And, and
Agreed.
and the other thing is too, and I've said this in the last episode, but just once again, there's also other things that Brian Wright and the team and basketball teams in general evaluate on a team with a player that doesn't necessarily have to do with anything on the court. Example number 1, Draymond Green. like,
Facts.
like because there's as much as the court does matter, like how your presence, your energy, especially with a guy like Keldon when it's so prevalent, that brings something to the team that
Mm-hmm.
even if he's having a bad shooting night, he can positively affect, the mental side, or even he can still positively affect things on the court with just his presence, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I'm not
Agreed.
saying that Keldon's necessarily, there yet where he's affecting the game with just his presence. But on bad shooting nights with Keldon, he's going to be the loudest guy on the bench still. And that's the reason. I mean, that's one of the reasons that the Spurs gave him that contract on top of, his ability on the floor. So people can criticize all that type of stuff, but the reason that the Spurs believe in him is because of stuff that is also important to basketball that isn't necessarily basketball, if that makes sense.
1,000%. I have nothing to add.
Alrighty, y'all. Well, I know I had a lot of rants in this episode. We went all over the place a little bit with B Right. So I appreciate you being with me here, Ethan. And if y'all enjoyed today's content, don't forget to hit that like button and that subscribe button below. If you want to stay updated with the show, go ahead and follow us on Twitter. I'm just gonna keep calling it Twitter because y'all know it's Twitter. At SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero to stay updated with the show. We appreciate you guys. Tell us your thoughts on what you think of Brian Wright's facilitation of this Spurs rebuild has gone, and the little nooks and crannies maybe that people have missed. Tell us your thoughts on it in the comments. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch y'all in the next one. See y'all later.